done to date. The 22-month investigation, as you said, $25 million spent, 37 indictments, more than 24 of those Russians who were indicted for their conspiracy to hack the DNC emails and have them leaked out through WikiLeaks. More importantly for President Trump, several of his associates indicted were pleading guilty, including his former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, false statements to the FBI, his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, facing several years in prison now for tax fraud, foreign reporting violations. He pled guilty as well. George Papadopoulos, foreign policy advisor in the campaign, also pled guilty for false statements. Rick Gates, the deputy campaign chair in the campaign, still cooperating with Robert Mueller. And, of course, President Trump's former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, now facing jail time as well. His having to do with the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, also financial fraud. Roger Stone, close Trump associate, indicted as well. I want to go to Cecilia Vega, our senior White House correspondent here. Cecilia, the president, despite those findings right there, has called this consistently a witch hunt and a hoax.
Practically every day, there has been a steady drumbeat of outrage from this president since day one, since this investigation was launched 22 months ago, really to the point of obsession. You know, the New York Times says that President Trump has blasted and publicly attacked the Russia investigation, Mueller's investigation, nearly 1,100 times. Those attacks in recent months have become angrier. They have become more frequent. They have become more personal. He talked about it in his State of the Union. He used profanity when talking about it to a group of conservatives recently. The strategy from President Trump from day one has been to create this deep state narrative, to really cast a shadow on Robert Mueller, even before this report came out. That could potentially backfire. As you and I know, most of Washington agrees Robert Mueller in this investigation has been above board. They have been a tightly run ship, leak-proof, right down until today when this report,
right up until 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Let me also bring in our chief White House correspondent, John Carl. John, in that letter, Barr says that Mueller has said he has completed the work. That means, apparently, no more indictments in the Mueller investigation. He has sent the report.
No more indictments coming from the special counsel, but George, remember, the special counsel has referred prosecutions to the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. There could be further indictments coming from there, but nothing more coming from the special counsel. They will close shop, ending a pivotal chapter in this investigation, George.
And the big question now is what happens next? What happens with Attorney General Barr with the report? What does he do with the report? What does he release to Congress and the public? John, yesterday you asked the president what he thought about that. I want to show his answer.
Mr. President, does the American public have a right to see the Mueller report?
I don't mind. I mean, frankly, I told the House, if you want, let them see it. Again, I say a deputy, because of the fact that the Attorney General didn't have the courage to do it himself, a deputy that's appointed appoints another man to write a report. Let it come out. Let people see it. That's up to the Attorney General. We have a very good Attorney General. He's a very highly respected man, and we'll see what happens. But it's sort of interesting that a man out of the blue just writes a report.
Despite the president's wishes, that does not mean the report will be public. Here's what the Attorney General, William Barr, said at his confirmation hearings about that.
Will you commit to making any report Mueller produces at the conclusion of his investigation available to Congress and to the public?
As I said in my statement, I am going to make as much information available as I can, consistent with the rules and regulations that are part of the special counsel regulations.
Will you commit to making any report on the obstruction of justice public?
That's the same answer.
Thank you.
Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst here as well. That answer does not mean the report is necessarily going to be public.
No, not at all. And if you actually read the regulations, it says the Attorney General may determine that public release of these reports would be in the public interest to the extent that release would comply with applicable legal restrictions. So it's basically saying it's in the hands of the Attorney General to decide whether A, it's in the public interest, and then B, are there any legal hurdles to overcome here? Also, one other thing to note, a lot of people talking about the fact that now the Southern District has work to do, the D.C. Circuit as well. But remember, all of these departments ultimately report to William Barr. And if there's any very controversial case, they're going to go to the Attorney General for sign-off before any future indictments happen. So it is still a very different process when it comes to the special counsel, who's effectively working independently, versus the Southern District of New York, et cetera.
But one of the things we know about what the special counsel has done is he has spun off this work to other districts, and there could have been spin-offs that we don't know about.
Absolutely. There could be a lot that we don't know about. All we know today is that it seems Robert Mueller has concluded his work. It seems Robert Mueller has done what he is required to do under the special counsel regulations, and that is hand the Attorney General this report. There are specific requirements in here about specific things that he has to address, et cetera. All of that is now done. Now it's up to the Attorney General to effectively create his own report and determine what's going on.
And I want to go to Pierre Thomas for more on that. The question is now, Pierre, what is the process the Attorney General is going to go through in these next days and weeks?
Well, George, it will be a fairly lengthy process to go through the report and figure out what can be made public. But there's some hints as to whether we will get some kind of summary from the Attorney General much faster than that. According to the letter, he says, Mr. Barr says, I am reviewing the report and anticipate that I may be in a position to advise you of the special counsel's principal conclusions as soon as this weekend. So that is very important news right there, George. We may get some kind of summary of the basic conclusions of Bob Mueller very soon.
That is more quickly than we anticipated, Pierre, isn't it?
Yeah, in terms of the conclusions, what he's making a distinction here that, look, in terms of the overall details of the report, there may be much of that I need to keep out of the public view. But in terms of his basic conclusions, some of that I can make known to the public very soon, George.
Okay, let's go to Mary Bruce up on Capitol Hill, our senior congressional correspondent as well. Mary, the Congress is going to want all of the details.
George, short of the full report and the underlying evidence, Democrats have made very clear here that they are not going to be satisfied, and they're going to use every tool at their disposal to try and get this information. That includes subpoenas, that includes possibly bringing Mueller himself up here to testify, and it could include going to court to try and get some of that underlying evidence. Democrats here are quick to point out that they feel there is precedent here, but George, this could be a very long, protracted fight, and that's why you are seeing Democrats here not waiting for them to get Mueller's full report. They are plowing ahead. They've made very clear that they're going to continue their robust investigations while they also try and essentially recreate Mueller's findings. It's also important to remember, George, that Congress has a very different mandate from Robert Mueller. While he has been looking into criminal intent, the Hill is focused on abuses of power, a much broader range here, and they are continuing that work while also making very clear they're going to do everything they can to get the full Mueller report and the underlying evidence.
Dan Abrams, another significant piece of news from William Barr here, saying there were no instances in the Mueller probe where Mueller was denied a step he wanted to take. That was significant because if he did do that, he'd have to tell Congress.
That's right. One of the things we knew that would have to be disclosed was if there was ever a time where Robert Mueller said, I want to do this, I want to indict someone, I want a subpoena, and that the Attorney General or the Attorney General's office had basically said no. He's now stating that did not happen. Now, when we hear that the principal conclusions could be released as early as this weekend, that may not tell us much. I mean, all that may say is there were no other indictments that we don't know about. That could be it, which is Robert Mueller concluded that the following people ought to be indicted, all of which we know about. Robert Mueller concluded that no other indictments were appropriate. And that may be the extent of the quote-unquote principal conclusions that are released this weekend.
I want to bring in Chris Christie as well, former federal prosecutor, governor of New Jersey, also has worked very closely with President Trump and Robert Mueller. Your impressions as he completes his work?
Well, listen, George, I think this is emblematic of what Mueller has done all along. The fact that nobody knew this was really coming. Nobody knows exactly what's in there. Bob Mueller has run a professional prosecuting office from the day he opened it until today, the day he closes it. And I think he's to be commended for that. Secondly, what I'd say also is that I think one of the reasons that Bill Barr may, in fact, be ready to give some summation of, certain certain conclusions that Bob Mueller reached is, given their relationship that goes back, now 25 years or more, I can't imagine that Bob Mueller has not discussed these conclusions before dropping this report on the Attorney General's desk with the Attorney General and giving him an idea of what's going on. So it's not going to be like Bill Barr is starting from scratch and has to go to page 1 of the report and start reading to do that. So I think you got to remember the personal relationship between Barr and Mueller. They've worked together before. They know each other well. High level of trust, I suspect. And I think Bill Barr knows a lot more about this report a couple of days ago than people may have suspected.
Okay, Chris Christie, thanks very much. John Carl, we're getting some initial response from the president's legal team.
Yeah, the president's legal team has put out a statement, George, saying we're pleased that the Office of Special Counsel has delivered its report to the Attorney General pursuant to the regulations. Attorney General Barr will determine the appropriate next steps. That's from Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow, the president's 2 principal lawyers on this. But the president was out attacking Barr in an interview that aired this morning, George, saying that if he, attacking Robert Mueller and the special counsel, saying that if he in any way questions his election victory with this final report, quote, the people will not stand for it. So the president's war on what he has repeatedly called a witch hunt has gone up right until the final moments of this special counsel investigation.
And Terry Moran, our senior national correspondent, that war has had some impact on the standing of Robert Mueller, at least the public standing of Robert Mueller over the course of this investigation.
It really has, in a polarized country where every question gets tossed into this political dogfight that we have over pretty much everything. The polls show, as you say, that trust in Robert Mueller has declined primarily among Republicans. He's getting hammered day after day in conservative media and by the President of the United States. That said, the manner in which he conducted this investigation, as you've spoken about, will no doubt, to most fair-minded people, raise his poll numbers. He's done it relatively quickly in absolute silence, not getting into the political mud fight. And we do know a couple of things now, concrete things, as you've just been talking about. He had free rein. No one stopped him from going in any direction. Not Rod Rosenstein, not Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, not William Barr. He has had free rein. And second, if you go back to his original assignment, he was appointed in order to investigate any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of Donald Trump. Well, in the indictments he's already brought, and he's not going to bring any more, there was little to no evidence of any coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. On the Manafort case, not on the Stone case, we just haven't seen it at this point. So it's possible that we will learn a conclusion, the broad conclusion, very quickly, which is that there was no collusion.
That there was no American, no Trump associate who cooperated with the conspiracy that the Russians were engaged in right there. And that would, Dan Abrams, bolster one of the points that President Trump has been making throughout this 22 months.
Right. And remember that the initial mandate was not about Donald Trump. It was about campaign, anyone involved in the Trump campaign. Were there any collusion with the Russians between them and anyone in the Trump campaign? And look, you have to say that if it turns out that there is no indictment that alleges any conspiracy between anyone in the Trump campaign and the Russians, that vindicates the president to some degree. That doesn't mean there was nothing that nothing was done wrong. It doesn't mean there's not potential obstruction of justice, but it does vindicate the fundamental claim about collusion with the Russians when it comes to the fundamental indictment of the 12 and 13 Russians for hacking and for the distribution.
I guess one of the questions would be, what is the standard for an indictment? Because if the reason were, and we don't know the reason, if the reason were that no action was taken against the president is because the Justice Department has determined that a president can't be indicted.
Well, that would be different, right? That would be different. If the reasoning is we've got him, but he's the president, and therefore we can't indict him, that's not a vindication.
But we may not know that.
We might not, but I would think that Robert Mueller has indicated that in his report. Whether that becomes public or not is a separate question. But if the reason that the president was not indicted is because he's the president, or if Mueller simply says, He's the president. As a result, we can't even seek to indict. That's not a vindication. But if there is a more thorough report which says that there wasn't enough evidence, that again, one of the things that they have to explain is declinations to indict. And if the explanation there says we declined to indict because there wasn't evidence of a conspiracy.
Vindication for the president.
Yeah, that's a vindication.
We're getting some more response from the White House right now. Sarah Sanders has sent out a tweet. Let's put it up on the screen. Cecilia Vega, what do we have here?
The next steps, she writes, the next steps are up to the Attorney General Barr, and we look forward to the process taking its course. The White House has not received or been briefed on the special counsel report. And we sort of knew this going in. We also know that they were preparing for this, that they'd had multiple statements ready to go, depending on what Mueller delivered today, that the White House lawyer is traveling with the president down in Mar-a-Lago right now. The White House special counsel is also traveling down with the presidents in Florida. They've been preparing for this. From the people that I've talked to in the White House, from the people our team have talked to in the White House, they weren't necessarily worried or nervous about this Mueller report. I think the nerves and the fear for potentially what comes next is with all of these other investigations, the spin-offs that have come with this.
John Carl, though, potential sigh of relief, if indeed no more indictments, sigh of relief for Jared Kushner, for Don Jr., the president's son, Don Jr., who a lot of Democrats believed were vulnerable on perhaps false statements to Congress and others.
A sigh of relief from the White House and perhaps some frustration on the part of Democrats that we're expecting something big coming at the end of this, an indictment of one of those people very close to the president. But, George, 2 points on that. One, important to point out, as you did, the people close to the president that have already been indicted as part of this, including his campaign chairman, his national security advisor, his personal lawyer, and the fact that the investigations continue. The special counsel investigation is over, but you still have criminal investigations, multiple criminal investigations, including, perhaps most importantly, the one out of the Southern District of New York, but also congressional Democrats just getting started in their investigations. So perhaps a sigh of relief here at the White House, but they know that they're still very much under fire and under attack.
Mary Bruce, getting more reaction from Capitol Hill?
Yeah, George, we're hearing from the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner. He is calling for Congress to immediately see this report and also for the declassified version to immediately be made public. He says nothing short of that will suffice. We're also hearing from the response from the first Democratic presidential contender, Senator Cory Booker, says that the report should be made public immediately. And, George, there is agreement on both sides to that. Remember, we did have nearly all House Republicans side with Democrats supporting a resolution here in the House to make this report public. That was largely a symbolic effort meant to increase pressure on the Attorney General. That measure was killed in the Senate by one of the president's top allies, Senator Lindsey Graham. But it is worth noting that both sides feel that it is important that this report be made public. Democrats obviously have many political reasons why they want to get to the bottom of this, but Republicans also are quick to point out that given the fact that tens of millions of dollars and nearly 2 years have been spent on this investigation, that the American public have a right to see these findings.
And the Attorney General, in his letter to Congress, is saying he remains committed to as much transparency as possible, tells the members of Congress, I'll keep you informed as to the status of my review. Pierre Thomas, we're learning a little bit more from the Department of Justice spokeswoman saying that basically this summary report by the Attorney General is done or very close to it.
Very close to it. And one thing is clear from all of this is that Bob Mueller and Bill Barr, who've been friends for a very long time, have been consulting throughout this process. That while Barr did not have the complete report, obviously, he was briefed on it, as would be the responsibility of Mueller to let him know what the investigation had found, the final steps that were being taken. So Bob Mueller is not coming to this tonight from a standpoint of being in the dark. He has had a lot of information. He's been in the job roughly 3 weeks now, and I would dare say that he's been studying this very, very closely. The other thing that we should point out, George, is that so much of these indictments were often redacted, blacked out. There's just reams and reams of material that we never saw that will be in that confidential report that Barr is reviewing. We don't know what story that tells, and it'll be fascinating to see how much of any of it we find out. Some of it could involve classified information, counterintelligence information, and that will be part of the narrative that Congress will most undoubtedly want to see, George. And the other thing we have to be careful about, and we will ask the question tonight, is were there any indictments under seal that we don't know about that were not made public, George?
That is another big question. Dan Ayers, as we think about this report, both the summary that the Attorney General is going to write and whatever Robert Mueller sent him, a couple of things to keep in mind. The Ken Starr report, remember, from the Clinton days, several hundred pages long, likely not to see something like that. And what could cause things to be taken out of the public version of this report, executive privilege, national security concerns.
And potential grand jury information. I mean, those are three areas where you could have it removed. The interesting part of this report is going to be the reasons they decided not to prosecute. I mean, that's going to be part of the heart of this, because as we talked about, if the reason that they're not prosecuting is because he's the president, that's going to be something that Congress and the public are going to want to know, because they're going to want to know, okay, so if he wasn't the president, what do you have? What was the possible crime here? If, on the other hand, it was a decision based on the substance that said, we are not moving forward because there's just not enough evidence here, that's a very, very different thing. So that's going to be a very important thing to look for when we see anything that is made public.
And Chris Christie, one of the things the Democrats on Capitol Hill have said that the Department of Justice is on weak ground to deny giving out those underlying materials because of the release of several 100,000 pages of documents in the Hillary Clinton email case. At the same time, we also know that the former FBI Director James Comey was heavily criticized for going public with his criticism of Hillary Clinton when declining to prosecute.
Well, Comey was dead wrong for going public on the criticisms of Hillary Clinton. It's against Justice Department policy, and it significantly affected the national election. But in terms of the releasing of documents in the Hillary Clinton email investigation, that investigation was concluded, George. The reasons I think Bill Barr would hold things back, which Dan's talked about already, are because there's still ongoing investigations that this information could affect in some way. And so Bill Barr is going to look at this. He understands he's got to err on the side of transparency, given all of the public attention to this. But Bill Barr is going to make the determination based upon one simple principle. He is not going to do anything that impedes the administration of justice going forward. And that will be the way he's going to make that determination. I'm convinced of it. And I think that, the bottom line here is that folks are going to have to, just calm their curiosity a little while longer, or if the Democrats don't like that, they can just close down the investigations in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere and have the report instead. But you can't have both.
Mary Bruce, we've already seen members of Congress, Democratic members of the House, Chairman Adam Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee say he expects to see that underlying information.
Yeah, and he points out that precedent that you were just discussing. He says that, look, when Republicans were in charge, they sought and obtained that underlying evidence regarding the Hillary Clinton email investigation. He's made very clear that he feels they are in solid standing here and that they're willing to go to court to resolve this issue. So you are seeing more and more Democrats backing that call. And, George, we have now heard a response from Chairman Nadler of the House Judiciary Committee. Of course, he's the powerful chairman of the committee where that does have power over the beginnings of any impeachment proceedings. And he says that they look forward to getting the full Mueller report and the related material, saying transparency and the public interest demand nothing less. But, George, getting that is going to be a huge, long fight up here, likely.
We're also getting a response from the president's former lawyer, Ty Cobb, who said Bob did his job, referring to Robert Mueller. He did it honorably. And this was the former counsel to the president, Ty Cobb. And I want to bring in Matthew Dowd. This is now moving. We still have those courts that are working on the trials, the Southern District, Eastern and Washington, D.C. as well, but this is moving largely into the political arena now. And you might have, it's conceivable, depending on what we finally learn from William Barr and Robert Mueller, a little bit switching sides. President Trump and his associates praising Robert Mueller, Democrats disappointed.
Well, yeah, I think, George, this is a key point, and as you and everybody else has laid out, there's, as the former defense secretary used to talk about, which was this: we have a lot of known unknowns, which we still don't know what the report says. We still don't know what other court districts are going to do. We don't know all that. But I think this is a really, really key point in the process, because largely it has been done in secret. Largely it has been done out of the public realm. But now it's being thrown in the midst of it's now the battles will become political. There may be continued legal issues, there may be others, but now it's going to be primarily political what they're about to face. And I actually think in this moment, the president's going to be on firmer standing in his world, because the president has been boxing shadows for 2 years. Almost his entire presidency, the president has been boxing these shadows of what might be in a Mueller report. Now it's going to come out. Now that part is done. Now he's going to be engaged in a political fight with Congress, with other folks. And so I think that this is an important date in the process, because the president, for his entire presidency, this has been hanging over his head.
Key member of Congress on the phone right now, Eric Swalwell, Democrat, member of the House Intelligence Committee. Your initial reaction?
Hi, George. Also a member of the Judiciary Committee. And I can assure you that the American people will see every word, every comma, every period of this report. The president is outnumbered now. This is not, the minority that we were in over the last 2 years. We will subpoena for the report if they hold it back, and we have the precedents of the judiciary from the Nixon-Watergate litigation on our side.
Isn't it?
Well, I'm not promising we'll see it as fast as we want to see it, but we will see it. Again, we have a subpoena power we didn't have before. The American people wanted that balance of power on abuses of power, and we have a judiciary that I think firmly will be on our side.
So am I right to hear you're saying you're not accepting William Barr's summary conclusions as the final word?
No, and I also believe that we probably will have to hear from Bob Mueller. I think there will be skepticism about unless we see the full report, and Bob Mueller, is able to say that this is everything. There will be skepticism because of the way that acting attorney generals and even the way Mr. Barr came into the position, sending an unsolicited letter about the Mueller investigation. There is an asterisk around, the people who have led this investigation. Bob Mueller is not tainted in that way.
As far as we know, no further indictments, indictments for the underlying charge of whether anybody in President Trump's world conspired with the Russians to interfere in our election. If that indeed is the final conclusion of Robert Mueller, are you prepared to accept it?
I am prepared to accept Bob Mueller's report. Again, he can only prove, or he can only indict on what he can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That doesn't mean that conduct didn't occur, and there's a difference. But what I will not accept is any criticism of the report by a person who did not go under oath, who was a subject of the investigation. So if the president did not subject himself to questioning, we don't want to hear from him, because the state of the evidence will not include his testimony, while others did go under oath.
John, I want to bring in John. Thank you, Congressman. I want to bring in John Carl again. We heard Dan Abrams talk about this a bit, but one of the things that we've heard consistently from the Deputy Attorney General who appointed Robert Mueller, Rod Rosenstein, is that you have to be very careful about releasing negative information about people who aren't charged.
Absolutely. He has been emphatic that it is not the job of a prosecutor to disparage somebody who is not charged with a crime. So, George, what you will not see here is a repeat of what happened with Jim Comey, where he came out and he announced at a big press conference that he was not indicting Hillary Clinton back in the summer of 2016, but then went on at some length criticizing her actions and her handling of her email as Secretary of State. You've seen people, there was a lot of speculation about Donald Trump Jr., about Jared Kushner, about the president himself, about others in his inner circle who have not been indicted by the special counsel. Based on what Rosenstein has said about this, I would not expect a report to come out and be harshly critical of them and then not lay out the case for an indictment. That is something Rosenstein has been explicit about. Prosecutors do not do that.
And for now, after 22 months, $25 million, three dozen indictments, Robert Mueller has completed his report. Excuse me, Cecilia, we just got something in from President Trump.
We did. It's all just breaking right now. George, our team is talking to sources who are speaking with the president, and they tell us that the president's initial reaction to today's news is glad it's over. He very much feels like, at least right now, this is case closed. But I think most of Washington probably feels like this is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end, and that the assumption was that Robert Mueller would have the last word, that he would find one way or the other that this was the president is implicated or not. I don't know that we can conclude that yet.
A lot more to learn. We could learn something as soon as this weekend. According to the Attorney General, may have his summary conclusions ready for Congress then. Robert Mueller has completed his report. The Attorney General will talk next. That is coming up sometime this weekend. Of course, we're going to have a full report on all of this tonight on World News Tonight with Dave Muir. That's coming up in just a little bit.
And we continue our coverage here on ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on this breaking news as ABC News has learned that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, has concluded his investigation of Russian interference into the 2016 campaign and delivered that final report to the Justice Department earlier this afternoon, joined by John Santucci, our senior investigative reporter, Catherine Faulders, our White House reporter. Great to have you with us. A lot to get into here, guys, as this is breaking. But let's give you the big picture look of where we've been. This Robert Mueller investigation has now gone on for 22 months, cost more than $25 million by the most recent estimates, and resulted in 37 indictments. 6 of those people, as you see here, were Trump associates. 5 of them have pleaded guilty. Of course, Michael Flynn, the national security advisor, the first among them. Paul Manafort, former campaign chairman, recently concluded his case. He's going to prison for a long time. And others there, Rick Gates, Michael Cohen, and others. We should say Roger Stone, the 6th, has pleaded not guilty and is up for trial. But what's next now that this report has come down? John, hope you can tackle this for us. Bill Barr has it.
He does.
And he's promised in a statement that he's going to give the top-line findings to Congress as soon as this weekend.
We have the letter right here. Our team has been pouring through it all afternoon. He's saying that he believes he can actually go through the summary of this report and give the top headlines this weekend to Congress and to the American people. And really, Devin, for all the months that we've been reporting this, talking about the timeline, the mechanism by which that we would learn something from the special counsel after it's gone to the Attorney General, that is rapid fire quick. We never thought that we would get something in that quick of a turnaround. It's Friday night now, so within 48 hours, if we actually learn what's in that report, that means that the dialogue that's been going on between the new Attorney General and the special counsel has been pretty significant.
Bill Barr saying he's going to notify Congress of those top-line findings. Of course, the president, we understand, Catherine, has been notified of this. He was, in fact, the first to be notified that Bob Mueller had concluded, and he does not yet have a copy of the report, though.
Right. That's what Sarah Sanders says. They haven't seen it. They haven't been briefed on it. But his lawyers, one of his White House lawyers, Emmett Flood, and his White House counsel traveled down with him on the plane to Mar-a-Lago today, and we're told that Flood found out about this around 4:40 p.m., so before Congress learned.
Now, we've already learned some reaction, though, from the president. He's going around telling associates down in Mar-a-Lago, Devin, that he is glad the special counsel's probe is over.
He is no doubt glad this thing is over. Our senior justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, has been leading the way on reporting this story. Joins us now. Pierre, all eyes right now are on Bill Barr, the newly confirmed Attorney General. He's the one who will get to decide how much of Robert Mueller's findings we all get to see.
Exactly, Devin. And I think the main thing to take from today's announcement, number one, Bob Mueller has completed the work. The work is done. The new headline tonight is that the Attorney General will give a summary of the conclusions that Bob Mueller reached in the investigation well before he goes through the document chapter and verse and decides in terms of how much of all of it can be made public for our reading and understanding and analysis. I think that is a huge thing that the American public will begin to get a peek inside. What does Bob Mueller really say in total? In total, what is his conclusion about whether there was collusion? What is his conclusion about whether there was obstruction of justice? We expect that those basic kind of answers might be given as early as this weekend.
And we do know, Pierre, that the report itself is meant to be very confidential. There's classified information in it, grand jury information in it. And I do want to put up the regulation that you're very familiar with, but just so our audience can see it. The Justice Department has pretty clear rules about what Bob Mueller was supposed to write. Here it is, so you can see for yourself. It says, at the conclusion of the counsel's work, he shall provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or the declination decisions by the special counsel counsel. It's actually quite simple. And Pierre, as you've been telling all of us here, that doesn't necessarily mean it will be a lengthy narrative document.
Actually, what it actually does mean, Devin, is that this is chapter and verse, soup to nuts, on what Bob Mueller investigated, who he talked to, who he decided to prosecute, who he decided not to prosecute, and why. And it's supposed to be done in a way so that the Attorney General, in this case William Barr, can assess all the work and look at it and say, okay, was everything done to specification? Was everything done in the right way? And what further action, if any, needs to be taken based on the investigation that took place? Now, after that, after all that's done, in deciding what's made public, that document could be made to be very short and simplistic, because there'll be many different things that were in the confidential report that we may not be allowed to be seen. For example, information about confidential sources overseas that they consulted to get information about, information from wiretaps and intercepts of foreign governments that we use to glean information about potential suspects in the case. Those kinds of details is what Bob Mueller and William Barr, and he said he's going to consult with Bob Mueller to determine how much of that gets known to the public.
And Pierre, before we let you go, we thought we'd bring in this visual aid here, which I hope our
Library
audience
books?
can
What do you got?
see.
Let's clear space. Let's clear space.
This is very significant.
What is that, Devin?
Is the Ken Starr report into
there you go.
The misconduct by President Bill Clinton. In fact, this is out of the office of your senior producer, Jack Date. This 5-volume report is quite lengthy, very fine print.
Very heavy,
here.
too, Devin.
It is. But, Pierre, a lot of people making comparisons to the Starr report and the Mueller report. Is it your expectation that Bob Mueller and Bill Barr will write something and give to Congress something that looks like this?
Well, again, the confidential report that got handed over to Bill Barr tonight, that probably looks something like that in terms of just the length of it. And now, the investigation did not go on nearly as long as the Ken Starr investigation, but, you know, you were talking about a lengthy document there. What will ultimately be given to Congress, I think, will be somewhat shorter than that, because there will be a lot of information that will be redacted. That's what he has to do in the coming weeks. But again, the headline, we're going to get some sense of the summary conclusions of Bob Mueller as early as this weekend.
All right, Pierre Thomas, senior justice correspondent. You'll be on that case all weekend, no doubt. Thanks, Pierre, for that. Let's bring in our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, now, who also has some thoughts, covered the Starr report back when it came out. Terry, tell us your take on this. You had a hand in covering this.
Well, a little bit. I just got into ABC News. It's history now, so I can have an opinion. That's one of the most despicable public documents of my lifetime, I think, because it did exactly what Bob Mueller didn't do. Mueller, in many ways, is the anti-Ken Starr. Ken Starr tried this case in the public. Every time the Clintons criticized him, he hit the microphones. His office leaked like a sieve. There were all kinds of leaks. That's why we were able to find out about Monica Lewinsky, because Ken Starr's office leaked it. Mueller's office never leaked it. And that final report was basically a dumping of 7 years of grand jury material to the Congress. Now, to be fair, Ken Starr did not think that report was going to be public, but he crafted the report as this lurid sexual melodrama. It was really not the way people should probably go about their business, and not the way that Bob Mueller went about his business. Now, what we see right now, at this instant, there's a collision of two forces. One, the Mueller style, which is really the traditional style of the administration of justice. The old school, you see him there. And the old school prosecutors had a rule: indict or shut up. You don't go out onto the courthouse steps and hold a press conference and say, I don't have any indictments, but I think this is a bad guy. That is not what Robert Mueller is going to do. And the regular law is now written so that the special counsel can't do that. The report goes to the Attorney General and remains secret. Now, the other force that's coming at it is the public's need to know. And that is being represented primarily right now by the Democrats in the House of Representatives. And there will be a collision. There will be a conflict over how much of that original report that Robert Mueller has just turned in will go to the House of Representatives Representatives. They say all of it, but it will be difficult because not even in Watergate, where there was a kind of a similar situation, did the House Judiciary Committee, which was impeaching Richard Nixon, did they get all that raw grand jury material, all that counterintelligence stuff that Pierre is talking about? It's going to be a big fight going forward.
A big fight ahead. Terry Moran, thanks so much for that analysis. I know you'll be covering that. I want to bring in now President Trump's former personal attorney, Ty Cobb, who helped him navigate the early stages of the Mueller probe. Ty Cobb joins us now by phone. Mr. Cobb, thank you so much. You've called Robert Mueller an American hero. You have been said some nice things about him. How concerned would you be at this stage with any shoes left to drop with the report that we haven't seen?
Personally, I'm not expecting that, particularly as I understand it, since the grand jury hasn't sat for over 2 months. But I want to just clarify one thing. I didn't actually represent, I wasn't the president's personal attorney. I represented the White House during that period.
Right, and Ty, we know that you were there for the period. It's John Santucci, Ty. We know that
John, how are you?
I'm good, Ty. I know this is a day that's been long coming for many people close to the president, but Ty, we know that you were there during the period that we saw many officials, almost 36 White House officials, go in and meet with the special counsel, turn over documents. As we wait for this report and we think about could there be things that could be redacted from it, do you believe that there is any information that you provided to the special counsel's team that we will not learn once we see his final report?
I expect that's the case. I mean, keep in mind that certainly any classified material, there's some rules about grand jury material, making it public, other than through indictments and trials, and then there are just the general rules that apply to the reporting obligation of the Attorney General. But the Attorney General, who is a Washington veteran and one of the more able Attorney Generals I think we have had in the past and are lucky to have now, I'm sure we'll do this in a very professional way, consistent with his commitment to provide as much transparency as possible.
And Ty, it's Catherine Folders. When we talk about this report and how long you think it's going to be, a little bit based off of John's question here on the executive privilege information, in order for this report to become public, like the president wants it to become public, he would need to see it in some form and consult with the White House on what exactly to release. Is there, in your mind, privileged information in this report that Mueller has written?
So I really have no idea, and I think we're all flying blind on that. It sounds like it was, characteristic of Bob, done very professionally, and if it's as detailed as some of the reports suggest, I'm sure that there may be issues of redactions of classified information or executive privilege information. On the other hand, it may have been written in a way to avoid those problems. So we just really don't know at this stage of the game.
And Ty, before we let you go, there had been so much speculation about President Trump sitting down with Bob Mueller for a face-to-face interview. It was extensively covered over these 22 months. In the end, as you know, he didn't sit down and have that interview. What do you make of that? And do you think that that it was the right call by his legal team to push back on that in the end?
Well, I think you have to, at 30,000 feet, you have the executive branch of the government. And the presidency itself cooperating with each other, and under the law, that process, if it doesn't involve subpoenas or other branches of government, intra-executive agency cooperation, it does not waive executive privilege as to any other entity, including Congress. So I think the cooperation that was provided, though, the reality is, the credit goes to the president on that. He was not fearful of any findings, and he made the decision to have his people cooperate fully and to produce documents without much objection. So I think he deserves some credit for that.
All right, Ty Cobb, former White House counsel, thank you so much for joining us by the phone. Ty, appreciate your time very much. Just to reset for our viewers joining us here on ABC News Live, some breaking news this afternoon. Special Counsel Robert Mueller has completed his investigation, delivered his report to the Justice Department. He was appointed back in 2017, of course, to look into Russian interference in the 2016 campaign, any potential collusion with the Trump campaign, obstruction of justice. After 22 months, more than $25 million spent, it resulted in 37 indictments. 6 of those were against Trump associates. 5 pleaded guilty. 1, Roger Stone, has pleaded not guilty. As you see here, most of them indictments involve Russians engaged in that interference in our election campaign. And now the report, the lengthy, what we assume to be a lengthy report, John, is in the hands of Attorney General Bill Barr, who is reviewing it. He said this afternoon that he expects to be able to provide the top lines to Congress as soon as this weekend. And we heard from Democrat Eric Swalwell there of California that he expects to hear from Mueller. He wants to hear from Mueller. They want the full report released.
Yeah, we have heard from multiple sources, from our Mary Bruce and Trish Turner that cover Capitol Hill for us, that they are hearing very well, and Catherine, you know this as well, that they do expect one committee, probably the House Judiciary Committee, to call Robert Mueller up to testify before them when they're going to have more questions. I mean, this report will be quite significant. You see the letter right there from the Attorney General. But they really want to know, Devin, what were things that Robert Mueller was looking into? You know, we know from our reporting from our team that covers the Department of Justice that there was nothing that Robert Mueller was told he could not do, which is a big headline right there. But he certainly brought many people in for the questioning. We know that 36 plus individuals from the White House went in and met with his team. Some of them had to testify before the grand jury, had a hand in those 37 indictments, some of their testimony. So we will learn quite a lot from this report, and eventually any testimony he has to give up on Capitol Hill.
We will indeed, and many more investigations before we let you go, John Santucci. We know that your work is not done as this report process gets underway.
Bob Mueller gets a vacation. I just canceled mine. I mean, the list here, Devin, is just significant.
Some of the legal challenges the president does continue to face, even as the special counsel has concluded after 22 months. He faces a number of other ongoing federal investigations.
Yeah, I mean, just look here in the courts. You have multiple investigations coming out of the Southern District of New York. That is the federal prosecutors up there, a very powerful U.S. Attorney's Office, as we know. He has some state cases as well, Devin. The New York State, New Jersey State, Maryland State, and the D.C. Attorney General are all looking into him. Then you can't forget, Devin, on Capitol Hill, we know the House Intel Committee, Judiciary Committee, and Oversight Committee have ongoing investigations. And guess what? Their friends over in the Senate, they have investigations too. So we are definitely not going out of business here. We're going to be very busy for quite some time.
We're going to let you run off. There's a lot of news to cover and shows to prepare for. John Santucci, our senior investigative producer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a listen now back to one person who's watching all of these developments this afternoon very, very closely, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She has not yet weighed in on the developments that Robert Mueller has concluded his investigation. But just a couple of days ago, she did say that she is expectedly waiting for his findings. Take a listen.
If the Mueller report comes back with information, I don't think we should impeach a president for political reasons, and I don't think we should not impeach a president for political reasons. But you have to be ironclad in terms of your facts, and we'll see where that takes us.
Nancy Pelosi, somebody who said that she didn't think Donald Trump is worth impeaching at this point. We're now joined in the conversation by our senior justice producer, Jack Dotze, and joined on the phone by our senior political analyst, Matthew Dowd. Matthew, want to pick up where Nancy Pelosi left off there. She has been watching this closely, and so many people had anticipated this Mueller report to be potentially a roadmap to Congress for impeachment. But Pelosi seems to have taken that off the table. Do you think that the president is out of the woods on that?
No, I don't think he's out of the woods on it because there's too many unknowns and too many known unknowns in this whole process. This is a key moment in the process. It's a really important point because it shifts from something that was being done quietly and mainly hidden to now something that's completely in the political environment, and Congress is in the political environment. And we don't know, obviously, what the Mueller report says. We don't know if he alleges things that Donald Trump did that he shouldn't have done, but he didn't get indicted. We don't know any of that. And so plus there's a lot of other investigations going on in the Southern District of New York and Virginia. There's congressional investigations going on various other topics. There's a lot of different things out there that impeach
impeachment could follow. And so I think the Speaker is right. She is right to say that we need to have a fax and it needs to be bipartisan. But I think we're now entered the phase of we're going to have a huge political fight that the president's going to be involved in. And I think, and as I said this earlier on network news, I think the president's going to welcome that because the president has been shadowboxing. He's been these figment that he couldn't really see or do. He's been fighting, and now it's going to be in the place that he loves to fight, which is in politics.
And Matt Dowd, thank you for that. Picking up where you left off, I want to put that to Jack. Jack, we are just learning from our Mike Levine at the Justice Department that at least one thing we know in this report is there are no additional indictments of President Trump himself, his family members, people close to him. We've seen all the criminal indictments that we're going to get, 37 of them.
Criminal indictments coming from
this probe, from the Mueller
investigation. There are other investigations that are still ongoing. So
that's correct. It's an important caveat.
Clear. Exactly.
From the Mueller probe itself. But you've been learning from Justice Department officials that in light of that, there shouldn't be much disparaging information in this public report about the president and people around him since they have not been charged.
Well, right. So the bar to release disparaging information on people who aren't being charged in court is extremely high. It's really against Justice Department policy to do that. The objective is if you're going to bring a charge against somebody, you do it in court where they can defend themselves. And so if you do something like that out of court, it really violates their rights. It's something that the Justice Department avoids as much as they can, and if they do something like that, it has to be authorized at the very highest levels.
So just to underscore that, if in fact in the course of this 22-month investigation, Bob Mueller perhaps uncovered some suspicious activities by some associates of President Trump or the president himself, maybe some things that didn't look so good, some behaviors that were pretty unsavory, but in the end concluded they were not criminal, we're not likely to find a lot of that being aired in a report, potentially.
Potentially, but there are other issues at stake here. This is also a national security investigation. So it could be that they found wrongdoing, but not in a way they could bring a charge in court. So if you have things like foreign intercepts, things like human sources overseas, things that they can't compromise by bringing into a court of law, or things that wouldn't be admissible as evidence to make a case, that doesn't mean they didn't find any wrongdoing. It means that they can't make the case criminally, but that doesn't mean it won't necessarily be in the report to the Attorney General. It might be referenced as a declination or something that they found wrongdoing, but they simply couldn't make the case in court.
And our Tara Palmieri, White House correspondent, is down with the president in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. He left earlier this morning and was there at his resort and golf course just as this news came down. Tara, what are you hearing from White House officials? How are they reacting to this news?
I think that they're all hesitant to really make some sort of statement yet, since they haven't actually seen the report. They don't know what is in it, but they are happy that there are no more indictments. I spoke to a source close to the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., who was really in the crosshairs of all of this, and it was suggested that he might actually face an indictment for the meeting that he had with those Russians at the Trump Tower during the campaign, where he wanted dirt on Hillary Clinton. There was also concern that he might be charged with lying to Congress, because we know that Mueller has done that. He's charged, he's actually charged some of President Trump's associates for lying to Congress. But since there are no more indictments from his office, they seem to be breathing a sigh of relief. But as we know, this doesn't mean that he's not making referrals to another district court.
And Tara Palmieri, thanks for that. Catherine, you've also been hearing from officials similarly that they're relieved but cautious.
Right, they are. They're relieved right now. The president is relieved. Lawyers close to him are. But the bottom line is here, in terms of comm strategy, they've prepared for every scenario, right? The worst case and the best case scenario. And frankly, so have his attorneys, Emmett Flood and Pat Cipollone, who are down at Mar-a-Lago with him. So while there's a sense of relief now, the president still wants the report public. I've been told that he wants to be briefed on it in some form. So they should learn more about it this weekend or Monday when the results are released publicly. But right now there is a sense of caution and hesitation.
And just to remind everybody what is next now that Special Counsel Robert Mueller has concluded his investigation into the 2016 campaign, we do know that the Attorney General is the man right now at the center of this. He has the report in his hands. It's a confidential report. report with some classified information in it. He will be the one to decide what, if anything, to share with Congress, what to make public. Democrats, we know, are turning up the heat on him, Jack Date, to produce as much as possible. But you know from experience in studying the regulations, Jack, that there are a lot of complications here that he'll have to balance.
That's right. So you had earlier on this desk the large stack of the Ken Starr report. These regulations were written with that in mind, to avoid just that type of thing, to avoid this massive dump of information, which contained grand jury material. It contained things that in the course of normal prosecutions and in the course of justice typically aren't made public. So these regulations that govern the special counsel were written with this thing in mind, to avoid this ever happening again.
Important context. This from just a couple decades ago was such a stain on the Justice Department. They didn't want to repeat.
Not just the Justice Department. It was the broader investigative apparatus that the law had set up. They did not want to repeat of that because it was unwieldy, and a lot of people's reputations were damaged in the process of this. People who weren't charged, and so the whole regulation is designed to avoid that type of thing from ever happening again. And so by design, the report is supposed to be brief. It's supposed to be, the report that Barr gives to Congress is designed to be a brief report. It's not supposed to be a lengthy, massive 5-volume monster like this is.
And let's go to bring our senior national correspondent Terry Moran back into the conversation, Terry, for sort of some closing thoughts here. Maybe the report won't be the size and detail of the Starr report, but there is certainly great appetite out there in the country on both sides of the political aisle for as much information as they can get on this.
Absolutely. The central question that is at the heart of the Mueller investigation that he was appointed to investigate: did the current president of the United States assist the Kremlin in attacking our democracy, is one of the most important questions the country's ever had to ask through a process like this. So people naturally will want to know. Now, we should say, as we've said, that was his assignment. He has not indicted anyone for that. He has produced no evidence in those cases of a coordination campaign between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. And he says there's no further indictments. So this, I think, to clear the air around this president, whether you like him or whether you don't like him, a lot of this has to come out. How it comes out is going to be tough. There'll be a fight between Congress, which wants it all, and the Department of Justice, which does not want either a repeat of the Starr report or just a dump of intelligence information and grand jury material. That, I think, is going to be the next fight. But I think the country needs to know the answer to that basic question that Robert Mueller was appointed to answer. Did Donald Trump or members of his campaign conspire, cooperate, coordinate with the Kremlin to attack our country?
And we think we know at least some of the top lines there. If the number of indictments are any guide, Terry Moran, thank you so much. As Terry alluded to there, guys, so much of the focus in this story is now going to be on Capitol Hill and the drumbeat for this information to come out both in congressional hearings but also to be made public. And we expect, Catherine, over this weekend, big headway to be made on that front with over at the Justice Department.
Yeah, and I just want to say that sources that I've been talking to close to the president now, while this investigation is over, Devin, they seem to be more worried about these investigations in the Southern District of New York, all of the congressional investigations. One person close to the president told me that they don't think that they are politically prepared for that internally, the flux of investigations that they have to handle. And look, we're looking at this list right now where the Trump Hotel, the Trump Foundation, the Trump Organization, the Trump inauguration, all of these things are still being investigated and are still on the table, and there's just much more to delve into here.
Yeah, let's just pause for a second on this graphic, not to get too far ahead of the news today. Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation has concluded, but let's not forget the number, the breadth of ongoing investigations and inquiries into the Trump world. The Trump Hotel.
They begin with Trump, I noticed.
I mean, they do, but the hotel, the foundation, his organization, the inauguration recently has been in the spotlight. Of course, those relationships, the golf clubs, all of this. Tara Palmieri down there at the golf clubs at Mar-a-Lago, on a lot of people's minds there within the president's inner circle. And as you've been following, the Democrats on Capitol Hill, if they don't get what they hope for in the Mueller report, are going to be pushing on all of those fronts.
That's right, Devin. Expect to see a request soon for the president's tax returns. They are going to try to create their own investigation, retrace Mueller's, and try to find their own evidence and present it to the American public in a more public way. Although we'll see what is in this Mueller report and if they can match it and use it in their investigation to build a more broad investigation. It is interesting, though, to see if the president goes golfing tomorrow. The optics, you know, this wasn't a very dramatic end to 22 months of digging, and you every weekend, every day, the president saying it's a witch hunt, it's a witch hunt. And you would expect when Mueller handed it over, there would be indictments, there would be some sort of drama and fair. And I think it's interesting to see how the president acts this weekend. Do we get more tweets? Does he carry on? Does he move on from this, or does he continue to trash Robert Mueller and use that as a rallying cry in 2020, saying that he was unfairly plagued in the first few years of his presidency?
Tara Palmieri, White House correspondent for us at Mar-a-Lago. We know you'll be there tracking the president's response all weekend long for all of our shows. Tara, thank you so much for that insight and reporting. And we should remind everybody that, as Tara alluded to there, a sense of relief, Catherine, because not only did Special Counsel Robert Mueller conclude his report today, but the Justice Department has also confirmed there will be no additional indictments coming from the Special Counsel connected with his probe of Russian interference in the 2016 campaign. That is it. Right. So that's a significant development as well. If you're just joining us here at ABC News Live, appreciate you watching our breaking news coverage. A big development today in the Special Counsel investigation into the 2016 campaign. Robert Mueller has concluded his work after 22 months looking into the allegations of potential collusion with Russian officials and obstruction of justice by President Trump. He spent more than $25 million in taxpayer money over the past 22 months, authorized back in 2017. We know that he returned 37 indictments, criminal indictments in this matter, 6 of those involving Trump associates. 5 of them pleaded guilty, several going to prison. Roger Stone, an outstanding case. Trump's longtime confidant and fixer, Roger Stone, is fighting those charges. Many of the indictments, of course, were Russians, including 3 Russian businesses. And this weekend, as we head into the weekend, Attorney General William Barr is now sitting with the Robert Mueller report, the confidential report. He is the man who will get to decide how much of that is sent to Congress, how much of that will be made public. And he did announce this afternoon, Catherine, that he expects at least the top lines of those findings to be released by Monday at the latest. So we do expect to at least continue to hear more about the Mueller report in the next few hours and days.
Yeah, that's right. We should know something public by Monday. And there's still cries from Democrats on Capitol Hill. And the president himself has said he wants it public. So we'll see what happens.
Catherine Falders here, our senior White House reporter and investigative reporter. Thanks so much for your reporting. I know you have a lot of work to do this weekend as well. Thank you for watching us here on ABC News Live for our breaking special coverage of the Mueller investigation, now concluded after 22 months. Our coverage here continues on ABC News Live right now.